What I'm going to show you in this video will literally change the way you create content forever. It will change your entire perspective when it comes to building a cult iconic brand. It will make you so much more comfortable on camera. If you're building your personal brands, it will allow you to finally be yourself. And this is literally what I'm applying, the psychology behind it and everything, the frameworks. It's what I'm applying in my own content with my own personal brands and with everybody that I'm working with. And I took some time to work on this video and to prepare everything because this is something that is so beyond the strategy, beyond the frameworks. It's so close to like my soul and the things that I actually believe in and stand for. And the goal with this, and we're gonna get into it, but the goal is to get you to understand that you can essentially create an iconic brand that stands out and no matter what the industry is without forcing it. Okay, without like this idea of like content is so heavy, like it doesn't even feel like I'm being myself. Because even like before we get in, before we dive in here, just to quickly touch on this, like I've recently had, and she knows this, but I've recently had a call with somebody that amazing person, and we started working together. And on the call, I was telling her about my journey and about like how I started with content and about the things and the steps and the phases that I struggled with. And I was telling her, for the longest time, I try to fit in, and it got to a point where I was feeling like I'm not being myself. It felt like I was just trying to appeal to everybody and sound like other people in my niche. And she essentially got super emotional on that call, and she like almost started crying, and both of us got emotional because that also let me know that like what I'm doing and what I'm going to show you here works. Okay, because as one of my best mentors said, like no matter what you do in business, it is all about people. Okay, so again, the main thing with this is going to be you understanding human psychology, but even beyond that, it's going to allow you to finally, and I know it sounds so silly, but it's going to allow you to finally be yourself without forcing it, without doing any of that. So this is how to use the collective consciousness to build a cult brand, to build an iconic brand, as I always say. And let's dive in. I'm super excited with this. This is probably my best video yet with this, so it's gonna be amazing. Now, again, my intentions with this, just to cover it, this, as I said, will change your life. And I really, really mean that, okay? This is not gonna be your typical, if you're new to the channel. By the way, I'm Andre. We talk about all of psychology, luxury brands, iconic brands, all of that. It will completely, as I mentioned, change your perspective when it comes to building your brands so that you will never have to overthink content ever again. And most importantly, as I mentioned, probably 5 times by now, so that you can finally be yourself without forcing it, no trying to fit in, no trying to build a funnel just because a random guru told you to, or trying to fit someone else's version of success as a brand. And I built this from my soul, from my heart, all with love. So let's jump in here. So here's what we'll go over in this video. We're going to go over what the collective consciousness actually is, because I know, to some of you, it might sound like this woo-woo thing. We're going to cover it, don't worry, and why it matters for your brands. We're going to dive into the psychology of repressed archetypes and why tapping into them creates obsession. Again, all of this terminology, if you're not familiar with it, we're going to go over it. We're going to go over case studies of creators and brands who've done this successfully, the repressed archetype finder framework to identify your positioning in the market. So this, what I'm going to show you here, is literally worth thousands and thousands of dollars. And I'm giving it like for free. So this is not going to be like a gatekeeping guru thing. And we're going to cover the shadow to sanctuary pipeline to turn repressed energy into cult loyalty, and also some content frameworks, like some specific frameworks that you can implement. So this is going to be really good. Now, what is the core idea of all of it here? The core idea is this. If you want to build an iconic brand that people are obsessed with, you have to tap into what we call collective consciousness. So basically, what do I mean by this? You have to figure out what's the strongest repressed archetype in your industry, become the vessel for it, become the voice for that, and essentially embody that. In really simple terms, let's say you're in the, relationship niche. Let's say you're a relationship coach. You have to take a look at that entire industry, and you have to identify what is the common, like, what are the common things that people struggle with. That, like, think about it like that, like the bubble of people. That collective consciousness has some common frustrations, right? It has some unspoken fears, some like internal dialogue, a lot of desires, a lot of patterns. And there is a repressed archetype in there that, and we're going to cover that and what that actually means, that you can become a vessel for. In other words, your goal as a creator and as a brand, it can be a clothing brand, it can be whatever, jewelry brand. You have to embody, you have to become the vessel for that repressed archetype. And that is how you're gonna get the reactions. Like, it feels like this brand literally knows who I am. Like, it's like they're in my head. It feels like you know me. It feels like I've gotten that so many times. I told you about earlier about the call that I had with this girl, and there's a reason why she cried. Because what I'm talking about, and it was just me literally, like, the way I do calls is not your typical like fucking sales calls with like overcoming objections and all of it. Like, no, the way I am, and you can probably see it now, is like I'm very human about it all. And I was just literally sharing my story and literally sharing like what I went through with content and what I struggle with and everything. And I think that, and I know it hit a nerve to a degree where like she was so emotional because she had also been going through that. And of course, we started working together. And I'm noticing the common denominator amongst everybody that starts working with me. And I have people, founders in private that worked in private equity. I have clothing brands founders. I have like amazing people that I work with all across these different industries. That's the common denominator. They start working with me because I hit that nerve, and I talk about and I understand their consciousness, and I became the vessel for it. And I know it sounds super esoteric and like stuff, but we're going to cover it. So that's the core idea. Now, Carl Jung in here discovered that humans share an unconscious, let's call it like database, right? And if you know Carl Jung, he's basically an expert in shadow work and everything, but we're talking symbols, roles, emotions, and stories that feel instantly familiar to all of us. And he called this the collective unconscious, right? And it's why certain stories resonate across all cultures, why certain characters feel archetypal, why certain emotions feel universal. And there's a shared layer of human experience that runs beneath individual consciousness. So again, think about it like this big bubble that we're all in, and we're constantly going through the same sort of emotions, same patterns, same archetypes. And again, your role, your job as a brand is to embody that archetype and literally become the voice for it. So let's continue with this. Before we dive into everything in the frameworks, I want to share why this matters in the first place. The thing is, you got to understand when content resonates, right? So when you get that reaction, like, it feels like you know me, it feels like you're in my head. When that happens with a lot of people, this is what's actually happening. You're not just sharing information, you're tapping into something that already exists in that collective consciousness. In other words, you're touching a nerve that was already exposed. You don't necessarily create the feeling of connection, you unveil it. And I want to highlight this because it's super important. You create a vessel, right, for something that people felt but couldn't articulate. And I had it happen to me with a lot of creators. You know that like reaction you get when like um you look at a video, you look at something, you look at somebody talking to the camera, you look at a post, a written post, a story, whatever, and they said something that you had in your soul, in your heart, in your mind, but you just couldn't phrase it. You just couldn't like put it all together. But they said it in such a way that again, it struck a nerve to the point where you start to become emotionally invested in that person or in that brand. It's that concept, right? And your cold brands forms when you embody a repressed archetype, when you say what people are thinking but afraid to speak, when you become the vessel for those hidden desires. And that is what creates obsession. So if you're in that place now, if you want to create something that people are genuinely obsessed with. I mentioned it before. I'm working with a founder from like one of the biggest like upcoming clothing brands across the US and global. And We were having these discussions. It's like, if you want people to truly be obsessed with this brand, we have to tap into that collective consciousness. And the beauty in what I'm going to show you is that it's universal. So it can be applied across different industries. So what are these archetypes? Because we're talking about archetypes, about all of this terminology. The idea is, inside this collective unconscious or consciousness, we got a couple of different archetypes. These are universal characters that show up in every culture, every mythology, basically every story. And Carl Jung named them the hero, the ruler, the rebel, the lover, the sage, the magician, the jester. And each archetype is tied to core human desires. So we got power, we got freedom, right? We got belonging, we got meaning, we got safety, we got pleasure. All of these different emotions, these archetypes here tie into those emotions. Now, it's also this concept, Carl has this concept of the shadow, which it's very important for what we're talking about here. The main idea with this is that every archetype has a shadow side. So we're talking about the traits a culture or person denies, represses, or finds unacceptable, right? So all of these things: rage, greed, lust, dominance, chaos, manipulation, vanity, because these shadow traits do not disappear. They get pushed underground, they get repressed, they get denied, right? But they're still there. And when somebody finally gives voice to these traits, people feel an instant visceral connection. And that's how you get the reaction from people. Like, it feels like you know me. It feels like you're in my head. When you touch on these different things that are essentially suppressed. And I'm going to walk you through like the exact framework to actually identify these things in your specific niche. And it's going to be an amazing thing in terms of, again, changing your whole approach to building a brand like this. Now, let's actually get into the psychology behind creating this obsession, and then we can cover the frameworks. So with this, we have a couple of different mechanisms that I want to walk you through, and then we're going to get into the actual framework. So mechanism number one in here is naming the shadow reduces shame. So this is what you have to understand, because when you name something people feel but are ashamed of, you essentially reduce their shame. You make them feel seen, you make them feel understood, you make them feel like they're not alone. And this is what you have to understand when it comes to building a brand that truly connects on a deep, deep level. On the level that, if we're talking about luxury brands, people will never question your prices. People will buy from you because of the things that you stand for, the things that you stand against. Again, we covered the enemy positioning. When we're talking about all of this, you have to get into their minds. Because when you do that, you get them, right? You get them. And when you truly get them, you make a lot of money. Money will just flow through you. And I'm noticing patterns. Like, a lot of people struggle with this because they have gurus, they have people telling them, say this to gain authority, say this hook, say this formula, do this, build this copy paste funnel, build this thing. But nobody teaches you that you can literally forget about all of that. And you can build an iconic brand the minute you start to understand the collective consciousness that you're in, and the minute you essentially embody, right, that repressed archetype, which is basically what we're gonna cover today. But most people walk around with, repressed desires, with repressed frustrations and emotions. They think, they make them broken. And when somebody, again, voices these things publicly, it's like permission. It's like they're being told, you're not crazy for feeling this, because I felt like that, myself. It's literally what happened in that call that I told you about. You're not alone, and this is human. And that creates, obviously, what? Bonding. It creates loyalty. And this is what we want. Mechanism number two in here is this idea of projection and instant recognition. So we project our disowned traits onto people we either like obsess over or hate, right? So when you embody a repressed archetype, people project onto you. They see the part of themselves they've hidden, and they become fascinated. And this is why, if you can, and we're going to dive into some case studies, this is why controversial figures and brands generate obsession, because people either love them or they completely hate them, right? That's the way it goes. Like I said it before, the worst kind of feedback that you can get is indifference. because you want people to either like, ideally love you, or you want a lot of people to hate you. And I know it sounds counterintuitive, and a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want any hate. When you start to get that level of hate, then that's a great sign that you struck a nerve, right? And this is happening because they're projecting their own shadow onto them. Let's get to the next one in here. So they should say 3, tribalism and identity, right? So when you embody a specific archetype, you create a tribe, right? Because following you becomes an identity statement. And I talked about it before with the biggest brands, with Chanel, with Ferrari, with all of these bigger brands. And it says something about who they are, what they believe in, what they stand for, what they stand against. And this is why cult brands have believers, not just followers, because the brand in and of itself becomes part of their identity, of who they are. And leaving it, write this down or like take a screenshot because it's super important. Leaving the brand, it would feel like betraying themselves. Leaving the brand that you actually believe in to that point where like you're connected to it on such a deep level. If you leave that, then that to your subconscious mind, like it triggers this idea of like, it feels like I'm betraying myself. And this is like this idea of obsession is so, that's why it's so powerful. And with all of these mechanisms and frameworks that I'm going to show you, the minute you apply everything, the minute you truly tap into the collective consciousness like that, you're going to win people over. Like, I'm telling you from personal experience, no amount of strategy, no amount of forced content plan or content angle or whatever is going to come close. Because this is all about people. You got to keep in mind when you're making content, right now, I'm not just talking to the camera, I'm talking to you. When you're creating content, you're talking to other human beings who go through emotions, who have, again, repressed emotions, repressed like fears, repressed desires, all of it. And you got to tap into that. So those were the mechanisms. Now, let's take a look at some case studies because you've probably seen on the channel, I love to break down like case studies so it really like makes sense. Now, the very first one we have Andrew Tate. And I know like some people might be like super triggered, like, why are you talking about Andrew Tate? Regardless, like put away your feelings for a side and let's kind of like study the psychology here because it's super interesting. So the repressed archetype in here that Andrew Tate embodied was this idea of like unapologetic masculine dominance. The collective wound, so the collective consciousness, the wound there is this: a generation of men who were told their natural impulses were toxic. They were shamed about wanting power, status, success. So what did he do? He essentially embodied that, right? He voiced those desires without apology. He said what millions were thinking but were afraid to say. You can see it on, the podcast he was saying, and obviously it was abrasive, right? But all of it was done like it was highly intentional. And the result of it all, obviously, millions and millions of devoted followers. You see them like on Twitter, they defend him. Like literally, that this is the idea of a cult. People like when you implement these things, like it's gonna get to a point where people defend you like you're their god, like you're their cult leader. And this, again, this is highly intentional. This isn't random, right? He didn't get here like with a random thing. And again, they felt like he was speaking for them. And even here, if you look, again, this generation, the shame, everything, he embodied that. And because he embodied it, obviously, young men were hooked to that. I remember back in like, what was it, 2022, I started to see his content, and a lot of the stuff that he was saying were kind of like resonating with me at the time. And I noticed like, wow, yeah, this guy like understands these things. Because there's a reason people get obsessed like that. Nothing is random. I need you to understand nothing that you see with these big creators, with these big brands, none of it is random. Another one in here is Donald Trump. I talked about him before, like on the channel, but this is really interesting because his repressed archetype is this idea of the outsider who says what everybody thinks, right? But they're afraid to say it. And the big collective wound is that the working class felt ignored by the elites. Like they had frustrations. They weren't allowed to voice. There were a lot of things. They couldn't be unhinged. They couldn't be, they couldn't express themselves essentially. And what Trump did was he just said things politicians weren't supposed to say without any filter, without any apology. You can see this in his speeches, like interviews, whatever, like everything. And the result of all of that, people didn't just vote for him, obviously, they wore his hat as an identity, and he became their mouthpiece. He became their vessel. To the point where people are literally fighting each other. They're fighting because of what? Because of this idea that their identity is so attached to that brand that they cannot let go. Because again, the principle is if they would let go, they would feel like they're betraying who they really are inside. And that's super powerful. The third and last one here is Hermes, because I wanted to give an example of like, a big sort of like influencer, content creator, big politician, and a big like actually luxury brand. With Hermes, right? The repressed archetype. It's exclusivity. It's being chosen. It's being worthy. And the collective wound here is society says everyone is equal, but people secretly want to be special, to be in the rooms that others cannot enter. So you see, it's a very like deep psychological thing. So what they did was this: you cannot just buy a Birkin, right? I talked about it before. You cannot just go and buy it. You have to be chosen. You have to prove you're worthy. The waitlist. This is the idea of the waitlist, the relationship, the qualification, because they tap into the repressed desire to be part of an elite group that others are excluded from. And the result in all of this is that the bag isn't the product. The feeling of being chosen is the product. You can see this with Chanel. You can see this with Patek Philippe, with the big like luxury watches, the brands, with every single brand. The product, the bag or whatever, the watch, that's not the product. The feeling of status. We talked about Ferrari. With Ferrari, it's the same thing. I'm not just paying for the car. I'm paying for what that car represents. What repressed desire that holds. And that's the product. Right? So it's very, very interesting. The pattern among all of these, because this is all pattern recognition, is that they all identified something people were feeling but they were afraid to express, and they embodied that energy without apology. They became the voice for a repressed part of the collective, and they didn't try to appeal to everyone. That's the thing. Like, keep in mind, especially when we're talking about building a personal brand, you don't need to appeal to everyone. You will trigger a lot of people, and you're supposed to. My content here, what I'm talking about, is triggering people. What I'm talking about on Instagram is triggering people, because I'm not trying to, to make something that everybody loves. First of all, you're never going to be able to please everyone, regardless of how much value you provide in the marketplace, regardless of how much you actually care about helping people. That's what I've noticed. There will be some voices that will like whatever, that will talk shit. That just comes with the dinner. But what these brands did, and people, they polarized. Right? And that's the thing. Polarization creates that cold energy. So the basic, like on an overview level, the basic formula for this is you got to find what's repressed. You got to become its voice. And that's how you dominate the market. So now let's actually get into this, what I like to call the repressed archetype finder framework. And you can use this to identify exactly which archetype you should embody, again, regardless of the industry, regardless of the niche, it doesn't matter, because these patterns still stand. So step number one with this is you got to identify the core tension in your industry. What is that? What is the biggest tension, right? Because everybody, every niche, every industry has a sort of like a big tension, like this idea of a push and pull. Like, for example, power versus helplessness, status versus invisibility. We were talking about Hermes, we were talking about Ferrari, talking about Chanel. They have this freedom versus control, ambition versus contentment. So you got to ask yourself, what is the primary tension my audience lives in? What do they want but feel blocked from having? So an example, in the men's self-improvement space, it's often, this idea of power versus helplessness. In the creative space, it's often freedom versus control. So ask yourself, what is the primary tension that the audience that I'm speaking to actually lives in? The second thing is you got to map what we call the light and the shadow, and I'm going to walk you through it. So you got to understand, and this is from Carl Jung, this idea of the archetypes. There's always like there's a duality of archetypes in every sort of space. So we got ruler, we got hero, we got rebel, sage, lover, and magician. Now, with this, there is a light side here, and then there is a shadow side or a dark side, right? And the big thing with this is you want to be in the middle. You want to be like right on the edge. You don't want to go like too light side or like too dark side. So with light side, for example, this is this idea of, the wise leader, the protector. But on the shadow side, we got all of this. We got tyrant, we got dictator, we got bully, right? Hero, same thing. We got champion, warrior, and then we got, villain, destroyer, and so on and so forth. You can take a screenshot of this because it's super helpful. So this is the duality, right? Now, again, as I said, position yourself where light meets shadow. Not fully in the lights, like boring, safe, forgettable, because this is what a lot of people do. They just like go completely like light side, right? They go completely safe. Is this idea of like they play it safe with the content. They try to appeal to everyone, appeal to as many people as possible, and they just try to like not bother anyone. You don't want to do that. You don't want to, at the same time, you don't want to be fully in the shadow, like repulsive, unsustainable. You got to be right on the edge with this. Then you got to find what's repressed, right? So ask yourself right now, in your market, in your industry, for your audience, what frustration does my audience have that they're ashamed of? What desire do they have that they think makes them bad? What opinion do they hold that they're afraid to voice? What do they secretly want, but pretend they don't? What do they hate, but aren't allowed to criticize? Because these will reveal the repressed energy you can tap into. You know what I mean? Like, if you truly start to understand the people that you're talking to this level, and this is not like a marketing guru tactic. Like, yeah, talk about their pain points. The classic, like, say this in the hook is deeper than that. It's on such a like a spiritual almost like level where you get into the minds, into the subconscious, the consciousness of the person and the collective in this case. And you understand the frustrations they have. You understand the pain that they go through. You understand the things, the lonely nights that a founder, for example, is going through. You understand the desires, the things that they hide, all of these forbidden, like repressed things. And when you understand those things, then you can tap into that with your content. And that's how you get people to literally like be obsessed, to cry on a call with you, to essentially relate to you to that level. And I just had a call before earlier today with this fashion stylist that I'm working with, and I was telling her the same exact thing. You helping women with the wardrobe optimization, with designing, whatever, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Because we have to tap into what do these women on a collective consciousness like standpoint, what do they actually struggle with? What are they thinking? What is their repressed state, right? So find what's repressed. Examples of repressed desires, just so you can like understand with this, could be this. I want to be better than other people. This can be a repressed desire in your market. I want power, not just peace. I want to be worshipped, not just liked. I want money more than meaning. I want to win and watch my competition lose, right? And again, the answers reveal the energy that you can tap into with this. The next step with this, write your brand thesis. And this is going to be super helpful. You don't have to put this in your bio. You don't have to like suddenly like now post it on your story, but this is more for you to understand your positioning. So fill this in. I embody this archetype for people who feel repressed emotion about this topic, and I show them how to turn it into a higher outcome. Could be status, could be money, power, could be beauty, or whatever transformation. So a couple of examples. I'm the ruler, right, for nice men who secretly want power, not approval. Or I'm the dark sage for creators tired of soft advice who want strategy that actually works. I'm the outlaw for entrepreneurs who resent the system and want to beat it. And this is going to be your positioning. Again, you don't have to put this in your bio. This is just something for you to understand what is the positioning that I need to take and I need to have in the market. So this is the brand thesis. Now, this is going to be super interesting. This is going to be the shadow to sanctuary pipeline that you're going to walk people through. And I know it might seem like really, in depth and stuff, but it's super simple once you understand. So basically this means this. People are, walking around with desires, frustrations, and feelings that they think make them broken. Stuff that they're really ashamed of. And again, you can look at this in every single industry, especially in the beauty or fashion industry. There are a lot of things there. There are a lot, right? Stuff that they cannot say out loud. And your job is to say it for them. Name the thing they're hiding. And when you do that, they will feel seen, because that's the whole point. What do we want as people? We want to feel seen. We want to feel like somebody actually gets us. That's what I've noticed with everybody that I work with. And I know I said it before, it sounds silly, but most people actually need someone, obviously for strategy and clarity and stuff, but they need someone with expertise and with experience to care. Okay, they need someone to care, to actually give a damn about what they're going through as human beings, beyond brands, beyond just content strategies and content angles. They need to know that, okay, this person actually sees me. They see me. And when you tap into that, when you master that, I guarantee you, regardless of what your offer is, regardless of what your brand is, you're going to dominate for the right people. And again, people will feel less alone because the shame will stop. And this is, with this, when you tell them about the things that they keep repressed, whatever, look, it's not just you. It's not just them. It's universal. It's human. Everybody feels this way. Society just made you think you were the only one. What happens with this is you give them an identity around it. And pay attention, because this is super critical. Not this idea like you're broken, but let's say you're a king. This is the archetype, who was told to play small. You turn the shame into a role they can be proud of. Then you show them how to use that energy for something good. Not just sit in the darkness, but channel it into power, success, creation. And that's the pipeline. You take people from shame to pride, from hiding to belonging, from repression to expression. And that's how you turn followers into believers. You're telling them, look, I know you're going through this. I know it's dark. I know it's whatever. I know you're feeling this. And obviously there are ways to phrase that better, but I'm just saying on an overview level, I know what you're going through. And it's normal. You're not weird. You're not, it's human. But here's a better way. Here's something that you can do with that. Here's how you can transmute that into something better, right? This is the shadow to sanctuary pipeline. And I'm gonna walk you through the stages here so that you can see this on a really practical level. And this is extremely powerful. So stage number 1 with this is you gotta name the repressed feeling, because your content must hit that nerve and state what people are not allowed to say. So again, simple example here, a couple of ones. You don't actually want balance. You want to win and watch your enemies lose. You don't want to be nice. You want power. You're just afraid of what people will think. And the psychology behind it, again, is naming that shadow reduces the shame and it makes people feel seen. It creates instant bonding, right? So when somebody reads your content, sees your content and thinks, holy shit, he's describing exactly what I feel, you've actually won. And I mentioned this before. Nothing is random. When a person sees your content, the things that you are writing about, and they actually cry, they actually borderline, just not break down, but in a good way. They're this really speaks to my soul. You won. At that point, you won. At that point, there's no competition. At that point, you can forget about the gurus. You can forget about all of your other competitors in the space because they don't matter, right? So this is stage 1. Stage 2, you want to normalize and universalize. So what does that mean? Tie the feeling to the collective unconscious. So show them this is archetypal, not personal brokenness. So examples. Every man has a tyrant inside him. Society just pretends he doesn't. These are for like different niches, but I picked these on purpose. Every ambitious woman has a villain arc fantasy where she stops being agreeable and starts taking territory. Every creator wants to be worshipped. The ones who admit it build cults. The ones who deny it stay invisible. And the biggest message with this is, you tell people this is not just you being broken. You're not broken. It's good. This is universal. This is human. This is archetypal. So this is stage 2. Stage 3, next. You want to give it a role and a ritual to like this sort of repression or like brokenness. So cult brands, they turn these feelings into roles and behaviors. So on a practical level, create a role with this. So give your audience an identity to step into. So it could be this: you're not just a follower, you're a dark king in training. You don't have to say like dark king, but you see what I mean? Like the psychology is you're not just this, you're actually this. This is what's happening. And you attach them to an identity. Remember what I talked about with Trump? He said he did this with the MAGA hat, with the MAGA campaign, Make America Great Again. And people attached attach their entire identity to that. And of course, they would literally go fight for this guy. Because at that point, when you get people to attach who they are deep down to your brand and your message, you completely won. Another one, you're not just ambitious, you're a member of this, the order. And you want to, with this, create rituals. What do I mean by this? Because, a lot of people are like, do you actually mean like cult rituals? No. So we're talking about specific behaviors, phrases, visual cues that anchor the archetype. So you can start videos with the same opening line, a specific phrase that only your audience uses, a visual symbol they associate with your brand. You can see this with Chanel, you can see this with Ferrari, with the red color. So it's the same thing, because rituals move the archetype from, ideas into the body, into daily life, into identity, right? So that's the whole point of giving it a role and actually making a ritual. Stage 4 with this is you want to then transmute that into a higher story. So your content must show the path from shadow to integration. And here's the pattern with this. Here's the dark impulse. Here's why it exists. Here's how to use it without letting it rot you. An example. Yes, you want power. Use it to build your own platform and protect your people instead of wasting it on common words, for example. Yes, you resent your competitors. Channel that into becoming undeniably better instead of bitter. This is the psychology, you're taking that repressed energy, right? And you give it a constructive direction for people. You transmute that into a higher story. Now, next in here, and again, you might want to watch this video a couple of times to kind of really internalize all of these frameworks, but these are very practical in here. So these are the 3 content types that tap into the collective consciousness, and they can be applied, they're universal, right? So type the first one. We're talking about the forbidden truth statements. So essentially, you want to say what nobody in your niche will say. So examples, nobody will tell you this, but your soft approach is why nobody respects you. Nobody will tell you this, but nice guys don't finish last because they're nice. They finish last because they're weak. And with this, you become the one that is willing to say the uncomfortable thing. This is a framework, this is a content type that you can literally take and apply right now. The second type, projection hooks, right? So with this, the formula is if you hate this type of persona, it's because you secretly want this forbidden thing. Super simple, right? So again, examples. If you hate flex accounts, it's because a part of you wants to be shamelessly rich and adored. If you hate cringe self-promoters, it's because you're terrified of being seen trying. If you hate successful young people, it's because they remind you of what you didn't do. So these hooks, what they do is they trigger instant self-recognition. This is super powerful. And that creates engagement, that creates shares, cult bonding, right? Because again, the worst kind of feedback that you can have is indifference. But I've seen a lot of content, and myself included. I've posted videos that literally got hundreds of thousands of shares and reposts and whatever because I struck a nerve. And it's the same thing. Projection hooks are powerful, are super powerful for that. Type 3 with this. We're talking permission posts, right? So this is where you essentially give people permission to, what they want. This is super simple. And again, can be applied to any kind of niche. It's okay to want more than enough, right? It's okay to want to be better than other people. It's fine. It's okay. It's okay to want recognition, because the thing is, you got to realize most people are just waiting for permission, and you might be the person to give them that. But if you don't tap into that, they're not going to connect with you on that deep level. So that's, the permission post. This is an interesting one. Type number 4, it's what we call archetypal storylines. And I'm going to quickly walk you through an example here. We have 3 kind of chapters. We have the call to adventure, the descent into the shadow, tapping into the shadow, and then we have the rebirth, right? The first one is you're tired. This is an example. You're tired of being good, the good invisible creator. Again, just a basic example. Descending into the shadow, so talking about that is, here's what you actually think about your audience, your competitors, your results. Tapping in again into the repressed feelings. And the rebirth is, here's your new identity, rules, and path. And again, this is on a very overview level, but the way you basically do this is you understand this is what people want. This is what people are looking for, the call to adventure. This is the repressed state, the repressed desires, and this is your vehicle, right? So you introduce them into your world, if that makes sense. So your job, because I want to highlight this, your job as a brand, if you want, what you want to take from this video is this. Your job as a brand is to find what's repressed in your niche, and you have to become the voice for that. Give people the language, aesthetics, and the story to express that part of themselves safely and loudly. And look, don't look at this like manipulation, because a lot of people might sit there saying, oh, this is manipulative or whatever. No, it can be used, definitely it can be used like that, right? I'm not saying it, but look at it as a service, because you're helping people integrate parts of themselves they've been forced to hide. And once you do that, you have a cult brand. That's what I'm trying to highlight here. Beyond any kind of guru strategy or funnel or VSL that they're telling you about, beyond all of that, once you understand that you can become the voice for the things that the collective consciousness, aka the bubble of people that you were talking to, are going through, once you understand, once you become that vessel for them, they will follow you everywhere you go. They will cry, they will smile, they will fight for you, they will share your stuff, they will buy your products, buy your offers, they will pay you thousands, and the sky is the limit. But you got to understand and implement these things, because these will also allow you to because I constantly talk about it, like, take your journey, the scars, quote unquote scars that you went through. Take the vulnerable low moments, take the rock bottom moments, take the high moments, and put a spotlight on that. And put a spotlight on who you actually are as a human being, and get people to connect. Speak to them. Speak to them on that deep level, and become a voice for the things that they're going through. This is the main idea of the video, regardless of the space that you're in. Because we're all going through a lot of emotions. We're all going through this roller coaster called life. It could be in the finance space, in the finance industry, fitness, mindset, business, whatever it is. We're all going through stuff. So your job as a creator, as a brand, is to understand people on that level. And especially, look, if we're talking, luxury brands, if you want to truly engineer that desire and get people to become obsessed, get people to be on your wait list to buy a $20,000 bag, whatever, just like Hermes, you wanna tap into the collective consciousness. You want to tap into that. You want to understand the things that they're afraid to talk about, the things that they're afraid to stand for. And you become the voice for that. You become the hero. So hopefully this video was valuable to you. If it was, drop a subscribe. We're gonna cover a lot on this channel, but again, psychology and understanding human patterns, understanding human emotions beyond the typical strategy copy paste stuff will allow you to finally be yourself. So I'll see you in the next one.